6 months ago, I handed my daughter Eliza the keys to a $340,000 house, paid in full, no mortgage, my life savings gone in one generous act of love. Last week, her husband Jaydon stood at that same front door and told me I was no longer welcome in the home I bought for them. "This is our house now," he said, blocking my path. "You're just causing drama and stress for Eliza." What Jaydon didn't know was that I'd been more than just a loving mother all these years. What he didn't know was that the house deed had some very specific clauses he'd never bothered to read. And what he definitely didn't know was who I really was before I became just mom. One phone call changed everything. One phone call made them realize they'd just kicked out the wrong person. And one phone call revealed that sometimes the quiet mother in the corner has more power than anyone could imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Amara Scott, and 3 days ago, I found myself sitting in a cramped studio apartment in Oakfield Heights, staring at the eviction notice that had arrived in my mailbox that morning. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, potentially losing the roof over my head, while 6 months earlier, I had purchased a beautiful 4-bedroom house worth $340,000 for my daughter and her husband. The apartment I was renting was nothing, like the spacious 2-bedroom home I'd lived in for 15 years before I made that life-changing decision to buy Eliza her dream house. This place was barely 500 square feet, with paper-thin walls that let me hear every argument from the neighbors, every footstep from the unit above, and every car door slamming in the parking lot below. The kitchen was so small I could touch both walls with my arms stretched out, and the bathroom had a persistent leak that the landlord promised to fix next week for the past 3 months. But it wasn't the cramped living conditions that kept me awake at night. It wasn't the constant noise or the broken air conditioning that had been on order since I moved in. What haunted me was the memory of standing on the porch of that beautiful house I'd bought. The house with the white picket fence, the rose garden I'd helped plant, the swing set in the backyard where I'd imagined pushing my future grandkids, and being told by my son-in-law that I was no longer welcome. "You're just causing problems, Amara," Jaydon had said, his arms crossed as he blocked the doorway. Behind him, I could see the living room furniture I'd helped them pick out, the family photos on the mantel that included pictures of me with Eliza throughout the years. "Eliza and I need our space. This is our house now, and we need to establish boundaries. Our house." Those words had cut deeper than I expected. I had signed over the deed to both of them, yes, but hearing him refer to it as our house, while simultaneously kicking me out, felt like a slap in the face. The house that I had saved for, planned for, dreamed about giving to my daughter as a symbol of my love and support for her new marriage. I had been visiting twice a week since they moved in. Twice a week, I would bring groceries, help with laundry, cook dinner, and spend time with my daughter like we'd always done. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was being a good mother. But apparently, according to Jaydon, I was being intrusive and overbearing. The worst part was that Eliza had stood silently behind him during that conversation, her eyes cast down, not meeting my gaze. My own daughter, the little girl I had raised, alone after her father walked out when she was just 8 years old, couldn't even look at me as her husband banned me from the home I had bought for them. "Maybe it's for the best, Mom," she had finally whispered, still not looking up. "We do need some time to figure things out as a couple. Figure things out." I had spent 23 years figuring things out as a single mother, working double shifts at the textile factory, taking on weekend cleaning jobs, tutoring neighborhood kids for extra money, all so I could provide for Eliza and save enough to give her a better life than I'd had. I figured out how to fix leaky faucets and unclog drains and change car tires, because there was no one else to do it. I figured out how to stretch a grocery budget to last the month, and how to make one outfit look professional enough for parent-teacher conferences and job interviews. And now, sitting in this tiny apartment with my landlord threatening eviction, Because the textile factory had laid off half their workforce, including me, I was trying to figure out how I'd ended up here. How I'd gone from being a homeowner with savings in the bank to being a 62-year-old woman facing potential homelessness. The factory closure had been sudden. Economic downturn, they called it, restructuring for efficiency. What it really meant was that they were moving operations overseas where they could pay workers a fraction of what they paid us. My severance package was laughable. 2 weeks' pay for 15 years of service. The unemployment benefits barely covered my rent, let alone food, utilities, and the medication I needed for my diabetes. I had considered asking Eliza for help. After all, I had given her a house worth more than I'd ever owned in my entire life. But every time I picked up the phone to call her, I remembered Jaydon's words. "This is our house now." I remembered the way Eliza couldn't meet my eyes. I remembered feeling like an intruder in the home I had purchased with my own money. Pride, maybe, kept me from reaching out. Or maybe it was the fear that they would see my financial struggles as validation of Jaydon's claim that I was somehow a burden on their lives. Either way, I had been struggling alone for the past 3 months, watching my small emergency fund dwindle as I searched for work in a job market that seemed to have no interest in hiring women my age. The eviction notice gave me 30 days. 30 days to come up with 3 months back rent plus late fees, or find somewhere else to live. At 62, with limited savings and no job prospects, my options were frighteningly few. The local shelters had waiting lists. Senior housing had waiting lists. Everything had waiting lists, except for the streets. I sat at that small kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of my old life packed into boxes, and realized that I had made a terrible mistake. Not the mistake of being generous to my daughter. I would never regret wanting to help her. But the mistake of believing that generosity alone would guarantee love and respect in return. The mistake of thinking that sacrificing my own security would somehow secure my place in my daughter's life. Tomorrow, I would start making phone calls. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my situation. I was alone, facing homelessness, while my daughter lived in the house I'd bought her, apparently content to let her husband keep me at arm's length. What I didn't know yet was that this rock-bottom moment would soon become the foundation for something much stronger. What I didn't know was that sometimes, losing everything is exactly what you need to remember who you really are. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 22 days before my eviction deadline. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like burnt water but was all I could afford, going through classified ads in the local paper with a red pen, circling any job that didn't explicitly state age limit or recent graduates preferred. The phone number on my caller ID wasn't one I recognized, but these days I answered every call, hoping it might be a potential employer responding to one of the dozens of applications I'd submitted online. Instead, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost 2 years. "Mrs. Scott? This is Jenny Gonzalez from Pinecrest Legal Associates. I hope you remember me. I handled your divorce proceedings back in 2018. Of course I remembered Jenny. She was the sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had helped me navigate the complicated process of divorcing Eliza's father after 25 years of marriage. She was the one who had fought to ensure I got my fair share of our assets, including the house that I eventually sold to help buy Eliza's place." "Jenny?" "Yes, hello," I said, setting down my pen and wondering why my divorce attorney would be calling me now. "Is everything all right?" "Well, that's what I'm calling to find out," she said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I received a very interesting call yesterday from a law firm in Burlington, Pierce, Hamilton and Associates. They were asking about you specifically and about any legal work I might have done for you recently." My heart started beating faster. Pierce, Hamilton and Associates was the firm that had handled the house purchase for Eliza and Jaydon. I had insisted on using a reputable firm to make sure everything was done properly, and they had come highly recommended. But why would they be asking about me now? They wouldn't tell me much over the phone, Jenny continued. But they mentioned something about a property deed review and potential complications with a recent transfer. Mrs. Scott, did you purchase property for someone recently? I told her about the house, about the $340,000 I had spent on Eliza's dream home, about signing over the deed to both her and Jaydon. Jenny was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Amara, she said, and her tone had shifted to something more serious. I need to ask you something important. When you purchased that house, did you use the services of an estate planning attorney? Did you set up any kind of trust or protection for yourself? No, I said, feeling foolish. I just wanted to buy the house for Eliza. I didn't think I needed protection from my own daughter. Of course not, Jenny said gently. But here's the thing. When I handled your divorce, do you remember that we discussed setting up certain legal protections for you, given your age and the fact that you were suddenly single after 25 years of marriage? I did remember vaguely. There had been a lot of paperwork during the divorce, a lot of legal terminology that went over my head. I had been more focused on just getting through the emotional trauma of ending my marriage than on understanding every legal detail. We set up what's called a protection of assets arrangement, Jenny explained. It's designed to protect people exactly like you, older adults who might be vulnerable to financial exploitation, even unintentional exploitation by family members. It includes automatic review clauses for any large financial transactions. My coffee was getting cold, but I couldn't bring myself to take a sip. What does that mean exactly? It means that when you made that $340,000 purchase, it triggered an automatic legal review. The system is designed to protect senior citizens from potential elder abuse or financial manipulation. The reviewing firm, Pierce, Hamilton and Associates, is required by law to investigate any large asset transfers that might leave a senior citizen financially vulnerable. I felt like the room was spinning slightly. But I wasn't manipulated. I chose to buy the house for Eliza. I understand that, Jenny said, and I believe you. But the law doesn't just look at whether you were forced to make the transaction. It also looks at whether the transaction left you financially vulnerable, and whether the beneficiaries of that transaction have since taken actions that could be considered elder abuse or exploitation. What kind of actions? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew where this was going. Well, for example, if you purchased a home for family members, and then those family members subsequently denied you access to that home, refused to provide you with housing assistance when you became financially distressed, or otherwise benefited from your generosity while leaving you in a precarious situation. The eviction notice on my table suddenly seemed to glow like a neon sign. 3 months behind on rent, facing homelessness, while my daughter lived in the house I'd bought her. A house where I was no longer welcome. Mrs. Scott, Jenny continued, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Based on what you've told me, and based on the inquiry from Pierce, Hamilton and Associates, it sounds like your situation has triggered several red flags in the elder protection system. The fact that you're facing eviction while your daughter lives in a home you purchased for her, that's exactly the kind of scenario these laws were designed to address. But I don't want to cause trouble for Eliza, I said quickly. She's my daughter. I love her. And I'm sure you do, Jenny said. But love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be financially abused, even if that abuse is unintentional. And it certainly doesn't mean protecting people who have put you in danger of homelessness. She paused, and I could hear her typing on a keyboard. Here's what I'm going to do, she said. I'm going to call Pierce, Hamilton and Associates back and tell them that yes, I am your attorney, and yes, I want a full review of your case. Based on what you've told me, There may be grounds to invoke the elder protection clauses that were built into your legal framework during the divorce. What would that mean? I asked. It could mean several things. At minimum, it would mean a formal investigation into whether you've been financially exploited. If the investigation finds evidence of exploitation, there could be legal remedies available to you, potentially including recovery of assets or mandatory housing provisions. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to process what she was telling me. Part of me felt hope for the first time in months, the possibility that I might not end up on the streets, that there might be legal protections I hadn't known about. But another part of me felt sick at the thought of taking legal action against my own daughter. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course, Jenny said. But Mrs. Scott, I want you to understand something. This isn't about punishing your daughter or her husband. This is about protecting you. You spent your life savings to help them, and now you're facing homelessness while they live in the house you bought. That's not love. That's exploitation, whether they intended it that way or not. After I hung up the phone, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the eviction notice. For months, I had felt powerless, like a victim of circumstances beyond my control. But suddenly, I realized that maybe I wasn't as powerless as I thought. Maybe it was time to stop being the generous mother who asked for nothing in return. Maybe it was time to remember that I had rights too. The phone call had planted a seed of possibility. But I had no idea yet just how dramatically that seed was about to grow. To understand why Jenny's phone call hit me so hard, you need to understand the story of Eliza and me. A story that began 23 years ago when her father, George Holmes, walked out of our lives without so much as a goodbye note. I was 39 years old when George left, working part-time at a small accounting firm while Eliza was in second grade. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. George had a steady job at the municipal water department, and I had always assumed we were building a life together. Then, one Thursday evening in March, I came home from work to find half our furniture gone, George's clothes missing from the closet, and a bank account that had been cleaned out except for $347. Eliza had been at her friend Kinsley's house that afternoon, thank God. When I picked her up and had to explain that Daddy had gone away and might not be coming back, her 8-year-old face crumpled in a way that still breaks my heart to remember. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" she asked, and I held her so tight I was afraid I might hurt her. "No, baby," I whispered into her hair. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and it has nothing to do with you." But even as I said it, I wondered if I was lying. Had I done something wrong? Had I not been enough? Of a wife, not interesting enough, not pretty enough to keep my husband from abandoning his family? The next few years were a blur of survival. I took a full-time position at the accounting firm, picked up weekend work doing bookkeeping for small businesses, and spent every evening helping Eliza with homework while simultaneously trying to figure out how to fix a leaky sink or program the thermostat or deal with the 100 other things that George used to handle. Money was always tight. There were months when I had to choose between buying Eliza new shoes and paying the electric bill on time. There were birthdays when her present was something I'd found at a garage sale and wrapped in newspaper because I couldn't afford gift wrap. There were school events I missed because I was working, and parent-teacher conferences where I showed up in my work clothes with paint under my fingernails from the weekend painting job I'd taken to make ends meet. But through it all, Eliza never complained. She was the kind of kid who would see me crying over bills at the kitchen table and quietly bring me a cup of tea she'd made herself, even though she was only 10 years old. She would pack her own lunch without being asked, walk herself to school, when I had to leave early for work, and do her homework without supervision because she knew I trusted her. "Mommy works really hard to take care of us," she would tell her friends when they asked why I wasn't at soccer games or school plays. Not with resentment, but with a matter-of-fact pride that made my heart swell and break at the same time. When Eliza was in high school, she started working part-time at a local cafe to help with expenses. I told her it wasn't necessary, that she should focus on her studies, but she insisted. "I want to help, Mom," she said. "We're a team, right?" We were a team. For 15 years, it was Eliza and me against the world. When she got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, I was so proud I cried in the grocery store parking lot for 20 minutes. When she graduated with honors in business administration, I used my vacation time from the textile factory to drive 8 hours to attend her ceremony. And when she called me 2 years ago to tell me she'd met someone special, I was genuinely excited for her. Jaydon Clark seemed nice enough during our first meeting, polite, well-dressed, with a decent job in sales at a pharmaceutical company. He made Eliza laugh, and after all those years of watching her be serious and responsible beyond her years, it was wonderful to see her carefree and happy. When they got engaged after dating for 18 months, I was thrilled. Eliza deserved happiness, deserved a partner who would love and support her the way her father never had. I threw them an engagement party at my house. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. But I spent weeks planning every detail and used money from my vacation fund to make sure everything was perfect. The idea to buy them a house came during one of our weekly dinner conversations. Eliza and Jaydon were living in a small apartment and talking about their dreams of home ownership. But like so many young couples, they were struggling to save for a down payment while paying rent and student loans. "I wish I could help more," Eliza had said, not asking for anything, just expressing frustration with their situation. "But the market is so competitive, and we can't compete with people who can make cash offers." That night, I went home and looked at my savings account balance. 15 years at the textile factory, living frugally, saving every extra dollar. I had $340,000 in savings and CDs, money I'd been planning to use for my own retirement someday. But sitting there in my small, quiet house, I realized that my retirement dreams seemed less important than my daughter's current happiness. She had spent her entire childhood sacrificing so we could survive. She had worked through high school to help with bills. She had chosen State University over her dream school because it was more affordable. She had never asked me for anything she didn't absolutely need. Now she was starting her adult life, and I finally had the means to give her something I'd never been able to provide when she was growing up: security. The gift of a home with no mortgage, no monthly payments hanging over their heads, the freedom to build their life without the financial stress that had defined so much of our own. The more I thought about it, the more right it felt. This was my chance to make up for all the times I'd had to say no, all the things she'd gone without, all the stress she'd endured because of our circumstances. I didn't tell her about my plan right away. Instead, I spent weeks researching neighborhoods, looking at real estate listings, consulting with agents. When I found the perfect house, 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, beautiful kitchen, nice neighborhood with good schools for future grandchildren, I made an offer the same day. The day I surprised Eliza and Jaydon with the house keys was one of the happiest days of my life. Eliza cried. Jaydon seemed speechless, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. I was finally able to give my daughter the kind of gift that would truly change her life. "Mom, I can't believe you did this," Eliza had said, hugging me so tight it reminded me of when she was 8 years old and afraid her daddy wasn't coming home. "You deserve it, sweetheart," I told her. "You've always deserved it." I thought I was securing her future. I thought I was guaranteeing that she would never struggle the way we had struggled. I thought I was ensuring that she would always have a safe place to call home. What I didn't anticipate was that in giving her security, I would end up losing my own. But looking back now, with Jenny's words echoing in my mind about elder protection, laws, and financial exploitation, I was beginning to wonder if my generosity had been seen not as love, but as weakness. Not as a gift between mother and daughter, but as an opportunity to be exploited. The realization was starting to hurt more than I was ready to admit. The morning I withdrew $340,000 from my life savings to buy Eliza's house, I remember standing in the marble lobby of First National Bank of Willowbrook, holding a cashier's check that represented 30 years of careful saving. and feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. "Are you absolutely certain about this transaction, Mrs. Scott?" The bank manager, a kind woman named Daisy Clark, had asked me for the third time. "This represents the entirety of your retirement savings, plus your emergency fund. I'm required to make sure you understand the implications." I looked down at the check, $340,000 made out to Clearwater Real Estate Holdings for the purchase of 847 Maple Grove Drive, the house that would become Eliza and Jaydon's home, the house that would give them something I'd never had: complete financial security in their housing. "I understand," I told Daisy. "This is for my daughter. She's never asked me for anything her whole life. It's time I gave her something truly meaningful." What I didn't tell Daisy was that I had spent the previous 2 weeks lying awake at night, calculator in hand, running the numbers over and over again. Without my savings, I would be entirely dependent on Social Security and the small pension from the textile factory when I retired in a few years. I was essentially gambling that I could work until I was 70, that I would stay healthy enough to keep earning income, and that somehow everything would work out. But every time doubt crept in, I would think about Eliza at 18, working 20 hours a week at that cafe while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. I would remember her at 12, quietly doing her homework at the kitchen table while I worked on freelance bookkeeping projects, never complaining that we couldn't afford a computer so she had to write everything by hand. I would think about all the times she had sacrificed for our family, and the decision would feel right again. The house hunting process had been intense. I spent 3 months driving around different neighborhoods in Willowbrook and the surrounding areas, researching school districts, crime rates, property values, and future development plans. I wasn't just buying them a house, I was trying to buy them a future. When I found 847 Maple Grove Drive, I knew immediately it was the one. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a 2-car garage, and a backyard big enough for the grandchildren I hope to have someday. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, the kind of kitchen I had dreamed about but never been able to afford. The master bedroom had a walk-in closet bigger than my entire bedroom in my current house. But more than the physical features, the house was in Willowbrook Heights, one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the area. The schools were rated 9 out of 10. The property values had been steadily increasing for the past decade. The neighbors were young professionals and established families, exactly the kind of community where Eliza and Jaydon could build a stable life. I made the offer, the same day I saw it, even though it was $15,000 over the asking price. In that competitive market, I knew that a cash offer would beat out any buyers who needed financing, and I was determined that nothing would prevent Eliza from getting this house. The real estate agent, a sharp woman named Trisha Davies, was initially skeptical when I told her I wanted to buy the house as a gift for my daughter. "Mrs. Scott," she said carefully, "I want to make sure you're thinking this through. This is a substantial investment, and family dynamics around large gifts can sometimes become complicated. Eliza is my only family," I told her. "Who else would I spend my money on?" Trisha walked me through all the legal options, putting the house in a trust, maintaining partial ownership, setting up a life estate that would allow me to live there if needed. But I rejected all of those suggestions. I wanted the gift to be clean and simple. I wanted Eliza and Jaydon to have complete ownership, no strings attached, no conditions that might make them feel beholden to me or worried about my future interference. "I want them to feel like it's truly theirs," I explained to Trisha. "I don't want them worrying about my feelings or my needs. I want them to be able to make it their home without any complications." Looking back now, I realize how naive that decision was, but at the time, it felt like the most loving thing I could do. The closing process took 6 weeks, during which I threw myself into preparing for the surprise. I secretly coordinated with Eliza's work schedule to make sure she and Jaydon would be free on the day I planned to give them the keys. I arranged for a photographer to capture their reaction. I even had a custom keychain made with their names and the address engraved on it. The hardest part was keeping the secret. Eliza and I talked on the phone at least 3 times a week, and she often mentioned their apartment hunting frustrations. Every time she complained about high prices or losing out on a house to cash buyers, I had to bite my tongue to keep from blurting out that I was about to solve all their problems. "The market is just so competitive, Mom," she would say. "We found this perfect little house last week, but someone came in with a cash offer $20,000 over asking price. How are normal people supposed to compete with that?" If only she knew that. Her normal people mother was about to become one of those cash buyers. I also spent those 6 weeks making adjustments to my own life to compensate for the massive reduction in my financial security. I canceled my cable television, switched to a cheaper cell phone plan, and started shopping exclusively at discount grocery stores. I began walking to work instead of driving to save on gas. I researched Medicare supplement plans to make sure I would have adequate health coverage when I became eligible. Most significantly, I sold my car, a 2015 Honda Civic that I had been planning to drive for another 5 years, and bought a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla with higher mileage but a lower payment. The $8,000 I saved went into a new emergency fund, though it felt pitifully small compared to what I had given up. My sister Haley Jordan thought I was making a mistake. "Amara, you're risking your entire future for something Eliza didn't even ask for," she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "What if something happens to you? What if the textile factory closes? What if you get sick and can't work?" "Then, I'll figure it out," I told her. "I always have. But why risk it? Why not help them with a down payment and let them get a mortgage like everyone else? I tried to explain to Haley what she couldn't understand, that this wasn't just about helping Eliza buy a house. This was about giving her something I had never had: complete security. No monthly mortgage payments to worry about if Jaydon lost his job. No risk of foreclosure if they hit a rough patch. No decades of debt hanging over their heads. I want her to have what I never had," I told Haley. "I want her to start her marriage without financial stress." The day I surprised them with the house keys was everything I had hoped it would be. We met at what they thought was just another house to look at. When I handed Eliza the keys and told her the house was hers, completely paid for, she burst into tears. "Mom, I can't accept this," she said through her tears. "This is too much. This is your retirement." "My retirement is seeing you happy and secure," I told her, and I meant every word. Jaydon seemed stunned. He kept looking around the house as if he couldn't believe it was real. "Mrs. Scott, this is incredible. I don't know how to thank you. Just take care of my daughter," I told him, "and take care of this house. Make it a home where you build a beautiful life together." They promised they would. They promised the house would always be a place where I was welcome, where I could visit any time, where future grandchildren would know their grandmother. Standing in that empty house 6 months ago, watching Eliza and Jaydon explore their new home, I felt like I had finally done something truly meaningful with my life. I had broken the cycle of financial struggle that had defined my own adult years. I had given them a foundation that would allow them to build whatever life they dreamed of. I had no idea that in securing their future, I was about to jeopardize my own in ways I never could have imagined. But even now, facing eviction and potential homelessness, I couldn't bring myself to regret the gift itself. I only regretted trusting that generosity would be met with gratitude, and that love would be returned with loyalty. I was about to learn that sometimes the people you sacrifice the most for are the ones most willing to forget what you've given them. The 6 months between giving Eliza the house keys and being told I was no longer welcome, they were filled with more joy and purpose than I had felt in years. Finally, I had a way to be useful to my daughter that didn't involve financial struggle or crisis management. I could simply be a loving mother, helping her daughter create a beautiful home. Moving day was a coordinated effort that I orchestrated like a military operation. I took vacation time from the textile factory, 2 precious days from my already limited annual leave, to help them move from their cramped apartment to the spacious house on Maple Grove Drive. I arrived at 6 a.m. with coffee, bagels, and a detailed timeline I had created to make sure everything went smoothly. "Mom, you don't have to do all this," Eliza had said, looking at my color-coded moving checklist. "Jaydon and I can handle it." "I want to help," I told her. "Besides, I'm good at organizing. Let me use my skills to make this easier for you." And I was good at organizing. 30 years of managing a household on a tight budget had taught me how to maximize efficiency and minimize waste. I had researched the best moving strategies, gotten quotes from 3 different truck rental companies, and even mapped out the most efficient route between their apartment and the new house. But more than the logistics, I threw myself into the emotional work of helping them make the transition. I spent hours at furniture stores with them, helping them pick out pieces that would work in their new space. Not expensive pieces, they were still young and building their careers, but thoughtful choices that would help the house feel like home. I remember standing in the home goods section of a department store, holding 2 different curtain panels up to the light, trying to determine which shade of blue would look better in their master bedroom. Jaydon was looking at his phone, probably checking work emails, while Eliza wandered the aisles looking overwhelmed by all the choices. "What do you think, Mom?" she asked, holding up a throw pillow. "Does this match the couch we picked out last week?" I felt so useful in that moment, so needed. This was something I could contribute to their life together, not money, since I'd already given all I had, but experience and attention to detail and the kind of care that only a mother could provide. "I think it's perfect," I told her. "But let's get 2 in that color and 1 in the darker shade for contrast." Over the following months, I developed a routine of visiting twice a week, usually Tuesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. Tuesday visits were practical. I would bring groceries, help with laundry, cook dinner, and tackle any household projects that had come up during the week. Saturday visits were more leisurely. We would work in the garden I was helping them establish, organize closets, or simply sit on the back porch and talk. I loved those Saturday afternoons especially. The backyard faced west, so the late afternoon sun would filter through the oak trees and cast dappled shadows across the deck. Eliza would make iced tea, and we would sit in the lawn chairs I had bought them as a housewarming gift, talking about her job, Jaydon's career prospects, their hopes for the future. "I can't believe this is my life," Eliza said one Saturday in late spring, looking out at the garden where we had just planted tomatoes and peppers. 6 months ago, we were living in that tiny apartment with paper-thin walls. Now I have a vegetable garden. "You deserve this," I told her, and I meant it completely. "You've worked so hard for so long. It makes me happy to see you finally able to enjoy life instead of just surviving it." The garden became one of my favorite projects. I had always loved gardening, but had never had the space or resources to do it properly at my own small house. Eliza and Jaydon's backyard was a blank canvas, just grass and the old oak tree. And I threw myself into designing and planting flower beds, a vegetable garden, and even a small herb garden near the kitchen window. I spent my own money on plants, soil, gardening tools, and a beautiful wooden bench that I placed under the oak tree. Every Tuesday, I would arrive with new additions: dahlia bulbs I had found on sale, a clematis vine for the fence, a bird bath that I thought would look perfect near the roses. "Mom, you're spoiling us," Eliza would say, but she said it with a smile, and I could see how much she enjoyed coming home to new improvements in her yard. I also took over many of the household maintenance tasks that they didn't have experience with or time to handle. I researched and scheduled service calls for the HVAC system, learned how to program their smart thermostat, and spent a weekend teaching myself how to caulk the master bathroom shower that had been leaking. When their garbage disposal broke in July, I spent my lunch break calling repair services to get quotes and schedule an appointment. When they mentioned that their hardwood floors were looking scuffed, I researched floor care products and spent a Saturday afternoon on my hands and knees, buffing out scratches and applying protective coating. I don't know what we'd do without you, Jaydon said one evening, coming home from work to find me installing new weather stripping around the front door. You're like our house manager. I laughed, but his comment made me feel proud. I was contributing something valuable to their lives. I was earning my place in their home through usefulness and care. Looking back now, I realize I was also unconsciously trying to justify the enormous financial gift I had given them. Since I couldn't afford to give them any more money, I gave them my time, my labor, and my expertise. I wanted to make sure they understood that my investment in their happiness was ongoing, that I would continue to support them in whatever ways I could. I started keeping a running list of projects and improvements for the house. I researched energy-efficient appliances for when their current ones needed replacing. I priced out a deck renovation that would add value to the property. I even looked into home security systems and landscaping services, always thinking about how to make their lives easier and their investment more valuable. During this period, I also made changes to my own lifestyle to accommodate my new role in their lives. I shifted my work schedule at the textile factory to have more flexibility for helping them. I declined social invitations that conflicted with my regular visiting days. I spent my weekends shopping for their household needs instead of my own. My sister Haley noticed the change in my priorities during one of our phone calls. Amara, when was the last time you did something just for yourself? She asked. Every time we talk, you're either at Eliza's house or planning your next trip there. I'm happy, I told her. I like being able to help them. It feels good to be needed. But you have your own life, Haley said. Your own needs. You can't just exist to serve them. I dismissed her concerns at the time. What Haley didn't understand was that helping Eliza and Jaydon didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like purpose. After years of struggling alone, after a divorce that left me questioning my worth, after decades of putting my own dreams on hold, I finally had a way to use my skills and experience for something meaningful. I was building something beautiful with them. I was helping create the stable, happy home that I had always wanted for my daughter. Every evening I spent cooking in their kitchen. Every weekend I spent improving their yard. Every problem I solved for them felt like an investment in our shared future. I imagined grandchildren playing in the garden I was planting. I imagined holiday dinners in the dining room where I had helped them arrange the furniture. I imagined growing old knowing that I had given my daughter not just a house, but a foundation for a lifetime of happiness. What I didn't realize was that all my efforts to earn my place in their lives were actually making it easier for them to take me for granted. Every problem I solved, every task I took off their plate, every way I made myself indispensable was also making me invisible. I was working so hard to prove my value that I forgot to protect my dignity, and that oversight was about to cost me everything I thought I had built with them. The storm was coming, and I was too busy tending their garden to see the dark clouds gathering overhead. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a gray Tuesday evening in late October. I had arrived at 847 Maple Grove Drive at my usual time, 5:30 p.m., carrying 2 bags of groceries and a small pumpkin I had picked up for their front porch display. The autumn air was crisp, and the oak tree in their backyard was dropping golden. Leaves across the lawn I had helped them overseed just a month earlier. But something felt different the moment I walked up to the front door. Usually, Eliza would hear my car in the driveway and meet me at the door with a smile and an update about her day. This time, the house was quiet, and I had to ring the doorbell twice before anyone answered. When Jaydon finally opened the door, his greeting was noticeably cooler than usual. No smile, no, "How was your day, Mrs. Scott?" Just a distracted nod as he stepped aside to let me in. "Is Eliza home?" I asked, setting the grocery bags on the kitchen counter and looking around for my daughter. "She's upstairs on a work call. Jaydon said, not looking at me directly. Some crisis with a client. She might be a while. I nodded and began unpacking the groceries, following my usual routine. I had brought ingredients for chicken marsala, Eliza's favorite, along with fresh vegetables and a bottle of wine for dinner. But as I moved around the kitchen, I became increasingly aware that Jaydon was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Scott," he said finally, leaning against the kitchen island with his arms crossed. "Can we talk for a minute?" The tone of his voice made my stomach tighten. This wasn't the casual conversation we usually had while I prepared dinner. This was something else entirely. "Of course," I said, setting down the package of chicken I had been unwrapping. "What's on your mind?" Jaydon ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I had noticed he made when he was uncomfortable. "It's just... well, Eliza and I have been talking, and we're wondering if maybe we should start handling more things on our own. You know, as a couple." I felt a cold shock of confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Have I done something wrong?" No, nothing wrong," he said quickly, but his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that we're trying to establish our independence, and having you here so often. It sometimes feels like we can't make decisions about our own home without running everything by you first." The words hit me like a physical blow. Our own home. I had bought this house for them, had spent 6 months pouring my heart and soul into making it beautiful. And now Jaydon was talking about it as if I were an outsider imposing on their space. "I had no idea I was making you feel that way," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought I was being helpful." "You are helpful," Jaydon said, but there was something in his tone that suggested this was more criticism than compliment. "Maybe too helpful." Last week, when our dishwasher started making that noise, Eliza's first instinct was to call you instead of figuring it out ourselves. And when we were talking about repainting the guest room, she said we should wait to ask your opinion first. I stood there in their kitchen, the kitchen where I had cooked dozens of meals, where I had spent countless evenings cleaning and organizing and making their lives easier, and felt like I was hearing about myself through a funhouse mirror. Everything I thought was love and support was being reframed as interference and dependency. "I never meant to make you feel like you couldn't make your own decisions," I said. "If you want me to step back, just tell me how. I'm happy to adjust." Jaydon seemed uncomfortable with my immediate willingness to accommodate their wishes. He shifted his weight and looked toward the stairs, as if hoping Eliza would appear and take over this conversation. "It's not that we don't appreciate everything you do," he said, "but Eliza and I need to learn to handle things ourselves. We need to feel like this is really our home, not just a place where you come to take care of us." The phrase "really our home" stung more than I expected. I had given them this house as a gift, had poured my life savings into making sure they had a foundation for their future, and now I was being told that my presence made them feel like it wasn't really theirs. "I understand," I said, though I didn't, not really. "What would you like me to do differently?" Before Jaydon could answer, Eliza appeared at the top of the stairs. She must have heard our voices because she came down slowly, as if she were reluctant to join the conversation. "Hi, Mom," she said, and for the first time in months, her greeting felt forced. "I didn't hear you come in." "Jaydon and I were just talking," I said, looking between them and trying to read the dynamic. "He was explaining that you'd like me to visit less frequently so you can feel more independent." Eliza's face flushed slightly, and she glanced at Jaydon with an expression that suggested this conversation had been planned in advance. "It's not that we want you to visit less," she said carefully. "It's more that we want to try handling things on our own for a while, just to see how it goes." I nodded, but inside I was reeling. For 6 months I had thought we were building something together, a family dynamic where I could be involved in their lives in a meaningful way. Now I was learning that they had been feeling suffocated by the very involvement I thought they welcomed. "I brought ingredients for chicken marsala," I said, gesturing toward the groceries I had unpacked. Should I put everything away and go? No. Mom, don't be silly, Eliza said, but her response felt automatic rather than genuine. You're already here. Let's have dinner. But the dinner that followed was unlike any of our previous Tuesday evening meals. The conversation was stilted, filled with awkward pauses and topics that seemed carefully chosen to avoid any discussion of the house, their plans, or anything that might require my input or advice. When I offered to help with the dishes, Jaydon quickly said, "We've got it covered," in a tone that brooked no argument. When I mentioned that I had noticed some of the plants in the front garden looked like they might need water, Eliza said, "We'll take care of it," without looking up from the table she was clearing. Every attempt I made to be helpful was politely but firmly redirected. It was as if they had erected an invisible wall around themselves, and I was no longer allowed inside their circle of decision-making and daily life. I left that evening feeling confused and hurt in ways I couldn't fully articulate. The drive back to my small apartment felt longer than usual, and I found myself replaying the conversation over and over, trying to understand what had changed. Had I really been too involved? Had my efforts to be useful crossed some line into intrusiveness? Or was this about something else entirely? Some shift in their relationship? Some new dynamic between them that left no room for me? Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to follow their lead. I cut my visits down to once a week. I stopped bringing groceries unless they specifically asked. I resisted the urge to offer solutions when Eliza mentioned problems at work or issues with the house. But instead of feeling like I was giving them healthy space, I felt like I was being slowly erased from their lives. Our phone conversations became shorter and less frequent. When I did visit, I felt like a guest rather than family. Welcome, but not necessary. The garden I had spent months planning and planting began to look neglected. The herbs by the kitchen window that I had carefully tended were dying from lack of water. The bird bath I had bought was green with algae. It was during one of these increasingly awkward visits that I overheard a phone conversation that would change everything. I was in the kitchen, washing the few dishes from lunch, when Jaydon answered, his phone in the living room. He was speaking in a low voice, but the house's open floor plan meant I could hear most of what he was saying. "Yeah, it's been better since we set some boundaries," he was saying. Eliza's mom was getting a little too involved, if you know what I mean. It was starting to feel like we were living in her house instead of our house. I froze, my hands still in the soapy water. "I mean, we're grateful for what she did," Jaydon continued. "But there's such a thing as too much of a good thing. Eliza's finally starting to feel like she can make decisions without checking with her mother first." The dish I was holding slipped from my hands and clattered against the bottom of the sink. From the living room, I heard Jaydon's voice pause, then continue in an even lower tone. I stood there, water dripping from my hands, trying to process what I had just heard. Too involved. Living in her house instead of our house. Too much of a good thing. This was how they talked about me when I wasn't around. This was how they really felt about the woman who had given them everything she had. The moment of truth was crystallizing in front of me, and I didn't like what I was seeing. The generous mother who thought she was building a relationship was actually being seen as an obstacle to overcome. And this was just the beginning. The worst was yet to come. The moment that shattered my world came on a bitter December afternoon, 3 weeks before Christmas. I had driven to 847 Maple Grove Drive with a trunk full of wrapped presents and a heart full of hope that the holiday season might restore some warmth to my increasingly strained relationship with Eliza and Jaydon. I hadn't been to the house in 2 weeks. My last visit had been so awkward and unwelcoming that I had decided to give them the space they seemed to want. But Christmas was different. Christmas was family time, and surely they wouldn't want me to spend the holidays alone in my cramped apartment. I rang the doorbell at 2 p.m., expecting to find them decorating the tree or baking cookies or doing any of the holiday traditions we had established over the years. Instead, Jaydon answered the door with an expression I had never seen before, not just cool or distant, but actually hostile. "Mrs. Scott," he said, not moving aside to let me enter. "We weren't expecting you." "I called yesterday and left a message," I said, confused by his tone. "I wanted to bring over the Christmas presents and see if you needed help with any holiday preparations." "About that," Jaydon said, and I noticed he was gripping the doorframe as if he were physically blocking my entry. "Eliza and I need to talk to you about something." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the December weather. "Is everything all right? Is Eliza okay?" "She's fine," Jaydon said. "But we've made a decision about our boundaries, and we need you to respect it." At that moment, Eliza appeared behind him in the foyer. She looked pale and uncomfortable, her eyes darting between Jaydon and me as if she were watching a confrontation she didn't want to be part of. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. "Maybe you should come in so we can talk." But Jaydon didn't move aside. "Actually, I think this conversation is better had out here," he said firmly. "What we need to say won't take long." I stood on the porch where I had imagined sitting with grandchildren someday, the porch I had decorated with the planters that were now empty and frost-covered, and felt a sick dread settling in my stomach. "Mrs. Scott," Jaydon began, his voice taking on the formal tone someone might use with a difficult neighbor. "Eliza and I have decided that we need to establish some clear boundaries about your involvement in our lives." "What kind of boundaries?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know. "We need you to stop coming by unannounced," he said. "In fact, we need you to stop coming by at all unless we specifically invite you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I don't understand. This is my daughter's house. This is our house," Jaydon interrupted, his voice sharper now. "And we have the right to decide who is welcome here and when." Our house. There it was again, that phrase that erased me completely from the equation. The house I had bought with my life savings was our house to the people who were now banning me from it. "Jaydon," Eliza said softly, and I heard something in her voice that might have been protest or embarrassment, but she didn't contradict him. She didn't invite me in. She just stood there, letting her husband speak for both of them. "I don't understand what I've done wrong," I said, my voice starting to shake. "If I've overstepped somehow, please tell me how to fix it. I never meant to." "It's not about what you've done wrong," Jaydon said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's about what's healthy for our marriage. Eliza and I need to learn to function as an independent couple, and having you so involved in our daily lives is preventing that from happening." I looked past him to Eliza, hoping she would say something, anything, to soften the blow her husband was delivering. But she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the ground. "So, I'm not welcome in the house anymore?" I asked, needing to hear it stated clearly. "Not without an invitation," Jaydon confirmed. "And honestly, those invitations are going to be pretty rare. We're thinking major holidays maybe, special occasions, but the regular visits, the helping around the house, the constant involvement, that all needs to stop." The casual cruelty of his words took my breath away. Major holidays, maybe. Special occasions. As if I were a distant relative they were obligated to tolerate rather than the woman who had made their entire life possible. "I bought this house for you," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "I gave you everything I had to make sure you could build a life here." Jaydon's expression hardened. "And we're grateful for that. But a gift doesn't come with the right to control our lives forever." "I'm not trying to control anything," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I just wanted to be part of your lives. I wanted to help. I wanted to—" "You wanted to what?" Jaydon demanded. Be our live-in mother-in-law? Have unlimited access to our home? Make every decision about how we live here? That's not fair, I said, tears starting to blur my vision. I never tried to control your decisions. I just offered help when I thought you needed it. Help that we never asked for, Jaydon said. Help that made us feel like children who couldn't take care of ourselves. Behind him, Eliza finally looked up, and I saw something in her eyes that broke my heart. Not sympathy or love or even guilt, but relief. Relief that her husband was saying the things she apparently felt but couldn't say herself. Eliza, I said, addressing my daughter directly for the first time. Is this really what you want? For me to stay away from the house I bought for you? From the life we've been building together? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Mom, you have to understand. Jaydon is my husband now. My first loyalty has to be to him and to our marriage. And if he feels like your involvement is causing problems for us, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The message was clear. When forced to choose between her husband and her mother, she was choosing her husband. The man she had known for 3 years was more important than the woman who had raised her alone for 23 years. I see, I said, though I didn't see it all. How had love become interference? How had generosity become control? How had the most loving thing I had ever done become the reason I was being expelled from my daughter's life? We're not cutting you out completely, Eliza said, as if this were some kind of consolation. We still want you in our lives, just differently. How differently? I asked. We'll call you, Jaydon said. When we want to see you, we'll call you. But the days of just showing up here whenever you want? Those are over. I stood there on the porch, holding a bag of Christmas presents I had spent my limited money on, looking at the house where I had imagined growing old as a beloved grandmother, and realized I was being dismissed, not just from their home, but from their daily existence. And if I need help? I asked. If something happens to me? The question hung in the cold air. Neither of them answered immediately. And in that silence, I heard everything I needed to know. We'll figure that out when it happens, Jaydon said finally. But right now, our priority has to be our marriage. I nodded slowly, understanding at last. I had given them everything, my savings, my time, my love, my energy. And now that, they had what they needed. I was an inconvenience to be managed, a problem to be solved, a source of stress to be eliminated. I'll go then, I said, setting the bag of presents down on the porch. I wouldn't want to cause any more problems for your marriage. As I walked back to my car, I heard the front door, close behind me with a finality that echoed through my chest. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, staring at the house I had bought, the garden I had planted, the life I had tried to build with them. The devastation was complete. I had lost not just my money and my security, but my daughter and my place in her world. I had given them everything, and they had given me nothing in return except rejection and exile. But as I drove away from Maple Grove Drive for what I assumed would be the last time, something else was beginning to stir inside me alongside the heartbreak. Something that felt like anger, something that felt like resolve. They thought they could take everything I had given them and simply erase me from the equation. They thought my generosity made me weak, my love made me disposable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Spent that night sitting on the floor of my tiny apartment, surrounded by boxes of papers I hadn't looked through in years. The eviction notice lay on my coffee table like a death sentence. 18 days left to come up with 3 months back rent or face homelessness. But for the first time since receiving it, the notice wasn't the only thing occupying my mind. Jaydon's words kept echoing in my head. A gift doesn't come with the right to control our lives forever. The casual dismissal, the entitled tone, The way he had spoken to me as if I were some manipulative stranger rather than the woman who had handed them a $340,000 house on a silver platter. But it was Eliza's silence that hurt most. The way she had stood there, letting her husband banish me from the home I had bought for her. As I sat there in the harsh fluorescent light of my kitchenette, going through documents from my divorce, something Jenny had said during our phone call suddenly clicked into place. She had mentioned that I wasn't as powerless as I thought. She had talked about elder protection laws and automatic legal reviews. At the time, I had been too overwhelmed to fully process what she meant. But now, with the sting of rejection fresh in my memory, I was ready to understand. I pulled out the folder labeled Divorce Final Papers and began reading through documents I hadn't looked at in 2 years. Most of it was standard legal language, about asset division and spousal support. But buried in the middle of the stack was a document titled Protection of Assets and Elder Care Provisions that I barely remembered signing. As I read through it, my heart began to beat faster. Jenny had been more thorough during my divorce than I had realized. The document outlined several legal protections that had been put in place to protect the client from potential financial exploitation or elder abuse in the future. It included automatic review triggers for any financial transaction over $100,000, mandatory cooling-off periods for large gifts to family members, and something called reversibility clauses for transfers that resulted in the client becoming financially vulnerable. But the section that made me sit up straight was titled Conditions for Asset Recovery. It stated that if any gift or transfer of assets resulted in the client facing housing insecurity, financial distress, or deliberate exclusion from family relationships, the transfer could be subject to legal review and potential reversal or modification. I read that section 3 times, my hand shaking slightly. Facing housing insecurity, I was 18 days away from eviction. Financial distress, I had no income and no savings left. Deliberate exclusion from family relationships, I had just been banned from my daughter's house by her husband. I grabbed my phone and scrolled back through my recent calls until I found Jenny's number. It was 9:47 p.m., probably too late to call. A lawyer, but I couldn't wait until morning. Jenny Gonzalez, she answered on the second ring, sounding alert despite the hour. Jenny, it's Amara Scott. I'm sorry to call so late, but I found the papers from my divorce, and I need to understand something. Of course, she said, and I could hear her moving around, probably getting to her home office. What did you find? I read her the section about asset recovery, stumbling over some of the legal terminology. When I finished, there was a long silence. Amara, Jenny said finally, how long ago did you make the house purchase? 6 months ago, I said. And you're currently facing eviction? 18 days, I admitted. And they've banned you from the property? As of this afternoon. They said I'm not welcome unless they specifically invite me, which apparently will be rare. I heard typing on her end. Amara, I'm looking at your file right now. Based on what you're telling me, you have grounds for invoking the elder protection clauses. The fact that you're facing homelessness while your daughter lives in a house you purchased for her. That's exactly the scenario these laws were designed to address. But what does that mean practically? I asked. What can actually be done? Several things, Jenny said, her voice taking on the sharp, professional tone I remembered from my divorce proceedings. First, we can file for an emergency review of the asset transfer. Given that you're facing imminent eviction, a judge would likely fast-track the case. Second, we can request temporary housing provisions, essentially requiring them to provide you with accommodations while the case is pending. Third, depending on what the investigation reveals, we could potentially seek partial reversal of the asset transfer or mandatory financial support. I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope mixed with a growing sense of my own power. There's something else, Jenny continued. When Pierce, Hamilton, and Associates called me about your case, They mentioned that they had concerns about the circumstances of the original purchase. Apparently, there were some irregularities in how the transaction was handled. What kind of irregularities? I asked. I don't have all the details yet, but it sounds like there may have been inadequate legal advice provided to you at the time of purchase. You should have been informed about the protection clauses and given options for maintaining some control over the property. The fact that you weren't suggests the original legal work was deficient. As Jenny spoke, I felt a strange transformation happening inside me. For months, I had seen myself as a victim, first of circumstances, then of my own. Poor judgment, finally of my daughter's ingratitude. But now I was remembering something I had forgotten. I wasn't just Amara Scott, the discarded mother. I was Amara Scott, the woman who had survived abandonment and poverty, who had raised a daughter alone, who had built a successful career and accumulated significant wealth through decades of smart financial decisions. I was a woman who knew how to fight for what she needed. Jenny, I said, I want to move forward with this. All of it. The emergency review, the housing provisions, whatever. Legal remedies are available. I want them to understand that you can't take everything from someone and then throw them away. I was hoping you'd say that, Jenny said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. But I need you to understand something, Amara. Once we start this process, there's no going back to the way things were. Your relationship with Eliza and her husband will be permanently changed. They're going to see this as an attack, even though it's really about protecting your rights. I thought about Eliza's face that afternoon, the relief I had seen when Jaydon told me I wasn't welcome anymore. I thought about the months of feeling like an intruder in the house I had bought, the gradual erosion of my place in her life, the casual cruelty of being dismissed after giving everything I had. The relationship is already changed, I said. They changed it when they decided I was disposable. I'm just responding to the reality they created. Good, Jenny said. Then we're going to remind them that generosity doesn't equal weakness, and that mothers have rights too. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my small apartment and looked around with different eyes. Yes, I was facing eviction. Yes, I was alone and struggling. But I wasn't powerless. I had legal protections I hadn't known about. I had an advocate who understood the system. I had rights that had been violated and remedies that could be pursued. For the first time since that devastating phone call from Jaydon, I felt like myself again. Not the grateful, self-effacing mother who asked for nothing and accepted whatever scraps of affection were thrown her way, but the strong, capable woman who had built a life from nothing after her husband abandoned her. I went to my laptop and began typing an email to my sister Haley. You were right about Eliza and Jaydon taking advantage of me, but you were wrong about me being helpless to do anything about it. Tomorrow I'm going to start fighting back, and I have a feeling they have no idea what's coming. I had given them everything willingly out of love. Now they were about to learn what happened when that love was betrayed and that generosity was exploited. They thought they had all the power because they had my house and my money. But they had forgotten something important. I was the one who had earned that money in the first place. I was the one who had navigated the legal system during my divorce. I was the one with decades of experience fighting for what I needed. They had made the mistake of underestimating me, and that mistake was about to cost them everything they thought they had won. The victim was about to become the victor. And tomorrow, I would start making the phone call that would change everything. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. the next morning with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since receiving the eviction notice, I had a plan that didn't involve begging or accepting whatever scraps of kindness others might throw my way. I had power, and I was going to use it. By 6 a.m., I was sitting at my small kitchen table with a strong cup of coffee, my divorce papers spread out in front of me, and a legal pad where I had written a detailed timeline of everything that had happened since I bought the house. Every conversation, every gradual boundary that had been set, every sign that I was being pushed out of their lives despite having given them everything I owned. At exactly 8 a.m., I called Jenny Gonzalez. "I was hoping to hear from you early," she said when she answered. "I've been thinking about your case all night, and I want to move quickly. The closer you get to that eviction date, the stronger our emergency petition becomes." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything," Jenny said. "I need documentation of the original house purchase, records of your current financial situation, evidence of your housing crisis, and most importantly, I need you to document every interaction you've had with Eliza and Jaydon since you gave them the house. Every time they made you feel unwelcome, every boundary they set, every way they've excluded you from the property you purchased for them." I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with Jenny, walking through 6 months of interactions that I had previously interpreted as minor disagreements or adjustments. But as I recounted them to a lawyer, they took on a different character entirely. The gradual reduction in my welcome. The way Jaydon had started speaking for both of them about decisions regarding their house. The casual dismissal of my contributions to their home and garden. The phone conversation I had overheard where Jaydon complained about me being too involved in the house I had bought for them. And finally, yesterday's formal banishment from the property. "Amara," Jenny said when I finished, "what you're describing is a textbook case of financial elder abuse. They've taken a substantial asset from you and then systematically excluded you from benefiting from that asset in any way. Worse, they've done it while you're facing a housing crisis that their acceptance of your gift directly contributed to." "What's our first step?" I asked. "I'm filing an emergency petition this morning," Jenny said. "We're going to request an immediate court review of the asset transfer, temporary housing provisions, and an injunction preventing them from making any major decisions about the property while the case is pending. How long will that take?" "Given your eviction timeline, I can get us in front of a judge within 48 hours, Jenny said. "But Amara, I need you to understand something. Once I file this petition, Eliza and Jaydon are going to receive official, legal notice. They're going to know that you're taking legal action against them. Their first response is probably going to be anger, and they might try to contact you to pressure you into dropping the case." I thought about this for a moment. "Will they be required to let me stay in the house while the case is pending?" If the judge grants our emergency housing petition, yes. They would be legally required to provide you with accommodations in the house until the matter is resolved. The irony was perfect. They had banned me from the house yesterday, and by tomorrow they might be legally required to let me move in. "Do it," I said. "File everything." While Jenny worked on the legal filings, I had other calls to make. My first call was to Pierce, Hamilton & Associates, the law firm that had handled the original house purchase. "I'd like to speak to someone about the legal advice I received during a property purchase 6 months ago," I told the receptionist. I was transferred to a senior partner named Alfie Wood, who seemed very interested in my case once I mentioned my name. "Mrs. Scott, yes, we've been expecting your call," he said. "We've been conducting an internal review of your property transaction, and I'm afraid we've discovered some significant oversights in the legal advice you received." "What kind of oversights?" I asked. "You should have been informed about your existing elder protection clauses before making such a substantial asset transfer," he said. "More importantly, you should have been offered options for maintaining some control over the property, life estate provisions, trust arrangements, or at minimum, a formal family agreement outlining your ongoing rights to the property. And I wasn't offered any of those options." "Our records show that the associate who handled your case treated it as a simple gift transfer, without conducting the due diligence required for someone in your demographic and financial situation. This was a serious error on our part." I felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. What does that mean for me now? "It means that the original transfer may be legally deficient," Alfie said. "We're prepared to support any legal action you choose to take. And frankly, Mrs. Scott, Our firm would be interested in helping you pursue remedies at no cost to you. We have a professional obligation to correct our mistake." 2 hours later, I had assembled what Jenny called an impressive team. Jenny would handle the elder abuse and emergency housing aspects of the case. Pierce, Hamilton and Associates would provide evidence that the original transfer was legally deficient and support efforts to modify or reverse it. And I had contacted the state's Elder Protection Services to file a formal complaint about my situation. But my most important call was to Ariana Peters, a private investigator Jenny had recommended who specialized in financial exploitation cases. "Mrs. Scott," Ariana said after I explained my situation, "what you're describing sounds like a pattern I see frequently. Adult children who receive large gifts from parents and then gradually push those parents out of their lives. But usually, there are other red flags, other family members who have been cut off, friends who have been dismissed, financial decisions that don't quite make sense." "I haven't really thought about that," I said. "I'd like to do some background research on your daughter and son-in-law," Ariana said. "Look at their financial history, their other family relationships, their social media presence. Sometimes these cases reveal patterns of entitlement or exploitation that go beyond just the immediate situation." "What are you looking for exactly?" "Evidence that this wasn't just a case of newlyweds wanting space, but a deliberate strategy to isolate you after securing your financial contribution to their lives." By noon, I had transformed from a powerless woman facing eviction into the center of a coordinated legal response that involved multiple attorneys, investigators, and state agencies. But more importantly, I had rediscovered something about myself that I had forgotten during months of feeling unwanted and disposable. I was formidable when I chose to be. My phone rang at 1:15 p.m. The caller ID showed Eliza's number. Let it go to voicemail. She called again at 1:22 p.m., again at 1:35 p.m. At 1:48 p.m., she sent a text. "Mom, we need to talk. Call me back, please." I didn't call back. Instead, I called Jenny. "They got the legal notice," I told her. "Already?" That was faster than I expected. "What did Eliza say?" I didn't answer. She's called 3 times and sent a text asking me to call her back. "Good," Jenny said. "Don't call her back. Don't communicate with them at all until after the emergency hearing. Tomorrow, anything you say right now could be used to argue that you're not really as vulnerable as we're claiming, or that this is just a family dispute rather than a legal matter. What if she shows up here? If they contact you in person, be polite, but don't discuss the case. Just tell them your attorney has advised you not to discuss the matter until after the court hearing." That evening, I sat in my apartment looking at my phone, which had logged 14 missed calls from Eliza and 6 from Jaydon. The texts had escalated from confused, "Mom, what's going on?" to angry, "This is ridiculous, call me back," to desperate, "Please don't do this to our family." But I didn't respond. For the first time in months, I was the one with power in this relationship. I was the one making decisions about when and how we would communicate. I was the one who had surprised them with action they didn't see coming. Tomorrow, I would walk into a courtroom, and a judge would decide whether 2 people who had taken everything I owned had the right to leave me homeless while they enjoyed the benefits of my generosity. For the first time since this nightmare began, I liked my chances. The phone call that would make them panic was about to be made. But it wouldn't be me making it. It would be the court clerk, informing them that they were required to appear before a judge to explain why they thought they could exploit an elderly woman without consequences. The tables were about to turn, and I was ready to watch them scramble. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Thursday at the Willowbrook County Courthouse. I arrived at 1:30 p.m. with Jenny Gonzalez and Alfie Wood from Pierce, Hamilton and Associates, feeling more prepared and powerful than I had in months. I wore my best navy blue suit, the same one I had worn to Eliza's college graduation, and carried a briefcase full of documents that told the story of my systematic exploitation. Eliza and Jaydon were already there when we entered the courtroom, sitting with a lawyer they had obviously hired in a panic. I could see the stress on their faces from across the room. Eliza looked pale and kept glancing toward the door, as if she were hoping I might change my mind and leave. Jaydon was frantically whispering to their attorney, who looked like he was hearing the details of the case for the first time. When our eyes met across the courtroom, Eliza's expression was a mixture of hurt, confusion, and anger. She mouthed the word, "Mom," at me, as if she couldn't believe I was really going through with this. I looked at her calmly, and then turned my attention to the documents Jenny was organizing on our table. Judge Patricia Martinez called the hearing to order at exactly 2 p.m. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had clearly read our emergency petition thoroughly before the hearing. "This is an emergency hearing in the matter of Scott versus Clark," she began. "Ms. Gonzalez, you've filed an emergency petition alleging financial elder abuse and requesting immediate housing provisions. Please present your case." Jenny stood up with the confidence of someone who knew she had a winning argument. "Your Honor, my client, Amara Scott, is a 62-year-old woman who 6 months ago made the largest financial gift of her life, $340,000 to purchase a house for her daughter and son-in-law. This gift represented Ms. Scott's entire life savings, her complete retirement fund, and her total financial security." Jenny gestured toward me. "Ms. Scott made this gift out of love, believing that she was securing her daughter's future and maintaining her place in her daughter's life. Instead, the respondents have systematically excluded Ms. Scott from the property she purchased, culminating yesterday in a formal banishment from the home. Your Honor," Jenny continued, pulling out a document, "Ms. Scott is currently 18 days away from eviction from her apartment because she no longer has the financial resources to pay rent, resources she spent on the house where her daughter now lives. This is a textbook case of financial elder abuse." Judge Martinez looked at the defendant's table. "Mr. Thompson, how do your clients respond to these allegations?" Jaydon and Eliza's lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable, stood up slowly. "Your Honor, my clients maintain that this is a family dispute, not a legal matter. The house was a gift freely given, and my clients have the right to set boundaries in their own home." "A gift freely given," Judge Martinez repeated. "Mr. Wood, I see you're here representing Pierce Hamilton and Associates. What is your firm's position?" Alfie Wood stood up, and I felt a surge of satisfaction as he delivered what amounted to a professional condemnation of Eliza and Jaydon's behavior. "Your Honor, our firm handled the original property transfer, and we have discovered serious deficiencies in the legal advice provided to Ms. Scott. She should have been informed about her existing elder protection clauses, and she should have been offered options to maintain some control over such a substantial asset transfer. More importantly, Your Honor, our review of the case suggests that Ms. Scott may have been pressured or manipulated into making the transfer without fully understanding the consequences." I saw Jaydon's face go white. Their lawyer leaned over to whisper something to him, but Judge Martinez was already moving forward. "Ms. Scott," the judge said, addressing me directly, "please tell me in your own words what has happened since you purchased this house for your daughter." I stood up, and for the first time in months, I felt completely confident in my right to speak and be heard. "Your Honor, I bought that house because I wanted to give my daughter the security I never had. I used every penny I had saved over 30 years of work. I didn't ask for anything in return except to remain part of their lives." I looked directly at Eliza as I continued. "For 6 months, I helped them move in, furnished their home, planted their garden, and maintained their property. I visited twice a week, bringing groceries and helping with household tasks. I thought I was being a loving mother and grandmother-in-law. But gradually, they began treating me like an intruder in the house I had bought for them. They set boundaries about when I could visit, criticized my helpfulness as interference, and made it clear that my presence was unwelcome. Yesterday, they formally banned me from the property, telling me I would only be invited for major holidays. Maybe. My voice grew stronger as I continued. Your Honor, I am facing eviction in 18 days. I have no savings left because I spent everything on their house. I have no family support because they have excluded me from their lives. Meanwhile, they live comfortably in the house I bought, apparently feeling no obligation to ensure that their benefactor has a roof over her head. Judge Martinez was taking notes as I spoke. When I finished, she looked up with an expression that suggested she had heard enough. Mr. Thompson, does your clients dispute any of these facts? Their lawyer conferred with Eliza and Jaydon for several minutes before responding. Your Honor, my clients acknowledged that they asked Ms. Scott to reduce her visits, but they maintain this was about establishing healthy boundaries, not exploitation. Healthy boundaries, Judge Martinez repeated with obvious skepticism. Mr. Thompson, your clients live in a house purchased entirely with Ms. Scott's money while Ms. Scott faces homelessness. How exactly is that healthy? For the first time since the hearing began, Eliza stood up. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Martinez nodded. Go ahead, Ms. Clark. Eliza's voice was shaking as she began. Your Honor, I love my mother. I never wanted her to face eviction or homelessness. But she was. She was taking over our lives. She was making decisions about our house, our garden, our daily routines. We felt like we couldn't be independent in our own home. Your own home, Judge Martinez interrupted. Ms. Clark, did you pay for this house? No, Your Honor, but did your husband pay for this house? No, Your Honor, but it was a gift. A gift from a woman who is now facing homelessness while you live in the house she bought for you, Judge Martinez said sharply. Ms. Clark, what have you done to ensure your mother's housing security since receiving this gift? Eliza was silent for a long moment. We offered to help her look for a new apartment. You offered to help her look for an apartment, Judge Martinez said, after accepting a $340,000 house from her. Ms. Clark, do you understand how this looks to the court? I watched my daughter's face crumble as she realized how her actions appeared when viewed by an impartial observer. Jaydon put his hand on her arm, but she shook him off. I didn't think. Eliza began, then stopped. I didn't realize she was facing eviction. When did you last ask about your mother's financial situation? Judge Martinez inquired. I don't know. I assumed she was fine. Judge Martinez looked down at her notes, then back up at the defendants. Mr. and Mrs. Clark, I'm going to issue a temporary order requiring you to provide immediate housing for Ms. Scott in the property she purchased for you, pending a full hearing on the elder abuse allegations. I'm also issuing an injunction preventing you from making any major decisions about the property until this matter is resolved. The gavel came down with a sound that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Jaydon looked like he was going to be sick. Eliza was crying openly now, staring at me across the courtroom as if she were seeing me clearly for the first time in months. As we filed out of the courtroom, Jenny leaned over to me and whispered, "That went even better than I hoped." Did you see their faces when the judge asked what they'd done to ensure your housing security? I had seen their faces. I had seen the moment when my daughter realized that accepting everything I had to give while leaving me with nothing wasn't love. It was exploitation. I had seen the moment when Jaydon understood that his sense of entitlement to their house was about to be legally challenged. Most importantly, I had seen the moment when they both realized that the quiet, accommodating mother they thought they could dismiss was actually a force to be reckoned with. The phone call that made them panic hadn't come from me. It had come from the court clerk, requiring them to appear and explain their actions to a judge. But the result was everything I had hoped for and more. They were about to learn that when you take everything from someone, you shouldn't be surprised when they fight back, and I was just getting started. 3 months later, I was sitting in the garden I had planted behind the house at 847 Maple Grove Drive, sipping coffee from my favorite mug and watching the spring bulbs I had put in last fall finally beginning to bloom. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was back where I had started 6 months ago, tending to this garden. But everything else about my situation had fundamentally changed. The legal proceedings had concluded 2 weeks earlier with a settlement that exceeded even Jenny's expectations. The court had ruled that the original asset transfer constituted financial elder abuse under state law, and that Pierce, Hamilton and Associates' inadequate legal counsel had compounded the harm. The final agreement restructured the property ownership to give me a 50% stake in the house, along with guaranteed housing rights for the remainder of my life. Additionally, Eliza and Jaydon were required to pay me $2,000 monthly in what the court termed restitution for financial exploitation. But the money, while welcome, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was the transformation in how I saw myself and how others saw me. I was no longer the desperate woman who had been facing eviction 3 months ago. I was no longer the discarded mother who had been banned from her daughter's house. I was Amara Scott, a woman who had successfully challenged a system that tried to exploit her generosity, who had assembled a legal team that fought for her rights, and who had proven that being loving didn't mean being powerless. The living arrangement had been awkward at first. The court order requiring Eliza and Jaydon to provide me with housing had initially meant the guest bedroom. But as the legal proceedings unfolded and my ownership stake in the house was established, I had claimed the entire first floor as my living space. I had my own entrance through the side door, my own kitchen space, and my own living area that I had furnished exactly to my taste. Eliza and Jaydon occupied the upstairs, and we coexisted with the polite distance of roommates rather than family. But that was fine with me. I had learned the difference between being loved and being tolerated, and I was no longer interested in accepting the latter in place of the former. The most dramatic change was in my relationship with my sister Haley, who had become my closest confidant throughout the legal battle. She visited every weekend now, and we would sit in my garden drinking wine and talking about our lives with the freedom that comes from financial security and hard-won wisdom. "I'm proud of you," she had said during her visit last weekend. "For months, I watched you diminish yourself trying to earn their approval. Now look at you. You're more yourself than you've been in years." She was right. Fighting for my rights had reminded me of strengths I had forgotten I possessed. During the legal proceedings, I had discovered that I was actually quite good at research, negotiation, and strategic thinking. Jenny had been so impressed with my organizational skills and legal instincts that she had offered me a part-time position helping other elder abuse victims navigate the legal system. "You understand what they're going through in a way I never could," Jenny had explained. "And you have a gift for helping people recognize their own power." I had accepted the position immediately. 3 days a week, I worked at Jenny's office, helping other older adults who found themselves in situations similar to what I had experienced. It was deeply satisfying work that gave me both income and purpose. But perhaps the most unexpected development was my relationship with Marcus Wood, Alfie's older brother, who I had met during the settlement negotiations. Marcus was a 68-year-old widower who had his own legal background and had been fascinated by the strategic elements of my case. What had started as professional admiration had gradually developed into something more personal. "You know," he had said over dinner last week, "I've met a lot of strong people in my career, but I've never met anyone who turned being underestimated into such a powerful advantage." We were taking things slowly, but for the first time in years, I was enjoying the attention of someone who appreciated my intelligence and strength rather than simply tolerating my presence. As for Eliza and Jaydon, our relationship had evolved into something more honest, if less warm, than it had been before. The legal proceedings had forced them to confront the reality of their behavior, and while they had initially been angry and resentful, they had gradually come to understand that the court's decision was fair. Eliza had approached me last month with something that might have been an apology. "Mom," she had said, finding me in the garden on a Saturday morning, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I know you think I chose Jaydon over you, but I think what really happened was that I got so caught up in trying to be a good wife that I forgot how to be a good daughter. I had looked up from the tomato plants I was staking and considered her words carefully. Eliza, I had said, being a good wife doesn't require being a bad daughter, and being independent doesn't require being ungrateful. The problem wasn't that you wanted boundaries. The problem was that you took everything I offered and then acted like I was asking too much by wanting to remain part of your life. She had been quiet for a long moment before nodding. I understand. That now. I think I understand a lot of things now that I didn't before. Our relationship was still rebuilding, but it was building on a foundation of honesty rather than the unexamined dynamics that had gotten us into trouble in the first place. Eliza now asked about my work, my life, my relationships with other people. She seemed genuinely interested in who I was as a person, rather than just what I could do for her. Jaydon had been slower to adjust, but even he had eventually acknowledged that the court's decision was probably the right outcome. I still think you could have talked to us before involving lawyers, he had said during one of our few direct conversations. I tried talking to you, I had replied calmly. I tried talking to you for months. You responded by banning me from the house I bought for you. When talking doesn't work, sometimes you have to let the legal system do the talking for you. He hadn't had much to say to that. The best part of my new situation was the freedom it gave me to build the life I actually wanted, rather than the life I thought I was supposed to want. I had my own space, my own income, my own social circle, and my own sense of purpose. I was part of a book club at the community center, had joined a hiking group for seniors, and was taking a watercolor painting class that I attended with Marcus on Tuesday evenings. Last week, I had received a call from a woman named Kinsley King, whose son and daughter-in-law had pressured her into selling her house and moving in with them, only to make her life so miserable that she was considering moving to a nursing home despite being perfectly capable of independent living. Mrs. Scott, she had said, I heard about your case from a friend, and I wondered if you might be able to help me understand my options. I had spent 2 hours on the phone with her, helping her understand that she had rights, that there were legal protections available to her, and that she didn't have to accept mistreatment just because it came from family members. I don't know how to thank you, she had said when we finished our conversation. You don't need to thank me, I had told her. Just remember that being generous doesn't make you powerless, and being family doesn't give anyone the right to exploit you. That evening, I had sat in my garden with a glass of wine, watching the sun set through the oak tree that I had once thought I would never see again, and reflected on how much my life had changed. 6 months ago, I had been a woman who defined her worth by how useful she was to others. Today, I was a woman who knew her worth was inherent and non-negotiable. 6 months ago, I had been facing homelessness because I had given everything away. Today, I lived in a beautiful house that I legally owned, working at a job I loved, building relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses. By fighting for my rights, I had taught Eliza and Jaydon that love requires reciprocity, that generosity deserves gratitude, and that family relationships must be built on respect rather than exploitation. The phone calls that had once made them. Panic had become the foundation for a new kind of relationship, one where everyone's needs mattered, where boundaries were mutual rather than unilateral, and where love was demonstrated through actions rather than just words. I was 62 years old, and I was finally living the life I deserved. It had taken losing everything to remember that I was worth fighting for. But now that I remembered, I was never going to forget again. The woman who had once sat in a rocking chair waiting for others to include her in their lives was gone. In her place was a woman who created her own life, on her own terms, with the confidence that comes from knowing exactly what she was worth, and I was worth everything I had fought to reclaim. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.